The first frost came early that year. It crusted the edge of the wheat fields in Garrow's Hollow with a fine sheen of ice, coating every husk and hedge like a thin film of glass. The villagers said it was a sign, but then again, they'd said that before. In 1843, when the church bell cracked. In 1857, when the black fox was seen prowling at midday. And now, in November of 1869, the sign had returned. It was Reverend Amos Finch who found the first trace. He had risen before dawn, as was his habit, to walk the outer path toward Weathering Bridge, a crumbling stone crossing long since swallowed by the encroaching marsh. There, beneath the fog-draped branches of a twisted sycamore, he paused. The air held still, breathless and heavy with the rot of wet leaves, and something else. Coppery, metallic, sour. Blood. At first he thought it an animal's, a smear across the mossy stones. But when he followed the trail further into the woods, the truth unfolded with slow, sickening clarity. A man's hat, a crumpled satchel, a heel mark in the mud, and then, there, in the hollow between two knotted tree roots, a pale, naked foot protruding from beneath a mound of disturbed earth. By the time the constable arrived from Lower Malling, the sun had risen. The foot had grown grey, and the trail, already faint, was nearly washed away by the soft drizzle that began to fall like whispered curses through the leaves. The body was exhumed in silence. It was male, middle-aged. No identification. Clothes stripped, arms oddly positioned, as if folded in some grotesque mimicry of prayer. But the most unsettling detail wasn't the bruising around the wrists, nor the dry, stretched mouth, nor the muddy scrape down the spine. It was the fact that every drop of his blood had been drained. The veins were collapsed. The skin sagged. His face was gaunt and shrunken, but not decomposed, preserved in a way that defied the elements. The village physician, Dr. Caldwell, could not explain it. There were no puncture marks, no signs of exsanguination in the expected places. And yet, the conclusion was inescapable. This man had been emptied. By late afternoon, the fog had thickened. News had spread. Garrow's Hollow was not the sort of place people came to. It was nestled in a shallow basin, surrounded by a crown of hills that the locals called the Teeth. A few dozen families lived there, most born and buried within the same 3-mile radius. The roads were dirt, the chapel wood, and the law, when it came, moved slow as molasses. The post arrived twice a week, weather permitting. Strangers were rare, which made the presence of the dead man all the more unsettling. No one claimed him, no one recognized his face, and no one had seen a traveler enter the village that week. That night, the corpse was laid in the church crypt, beneath the sanctuary floor. Reverend Finch locked the door himself, though he did not sleep. He claimed the air in the chapel had turned thicker after sundown, as if the stone walls themselves were breathing. 2 nights later, the body disappeared. There was no break-in, no evidence of tampering. The lock was untouched, the crypt door unbroken, but where the slab had rested was only an indentation on the dust-covered floor. The body was gone. It was the gravedigger's daughter who said it first, whispered it behind her scarf, as the constable questioned the reverend under the pale, yellow lamplight. "It's them. The Rethorns. Come harvest time, they always return." The name stilled the room. No one spoke of the Rethorns, not since the winter of 1852. But old men remembered, and those who did remembered blood, The morning after the body vanished, Garrow's Hollow awoke to a silence so unnatural, even the crows on the east ridge remained still. Fog still clung to the trees, low and unmoving. Children were kept inside, their windows shuttered, and shopkeepers in the square opened late, their movements slow and deliberate, as if trying not to wake something that might still be sleeping beneath the earth. The crypt door had remained locked. Reverend Finch insisted he'd checked it himself at dawn, hands trembling against the iron key. The lock was intact, the hinges untouched, but the slab that once bore the nameless man's weight was bare. Not even a stain remained on the limestone. The villagers gathered quietly in the back of St. Jude's Chapel that morning, not for service, but for answers. No bells were rung, no hymns were sung. Constable Alfred Greaves stood at the front with his hat in his hands, flanked by Dr. Caldwell and Reverend Finch. All three looked more like pallbearers than officials. No one spoke of the body, not directly. Only of the situation, the incident, the return in a village as old as Garrow's Hollow. Language was never direct, not when fear stirred. The Rhythorn name floated between lips in broken pieces, sometimes in whispers, sometimes not at all. For those under 40, it meant little. A family name, rarely mentioned and never visited. But the older villagers, those with ink-stained fingers and grey along their temples, had longer memories. Mrs. Hester Ambrose, widow of the blacksmith, was one of them. She was the first to break silence. Sitting stiff in her kitchen off Bramble Row, she told the constable what she remembered of the Rhythorns. "They weren't like us," she said, eyes focused on the chipped rim of her teacup. "Never had been. Lived in the hills east of the Hollow, up near Old Brindle Wood, 4 of them. Father, 2 sons, and a woman who may have been wife or sister. No one ever knew. They kept goats, traded skins, always smelled of vinegar and ash." She paused. "In 52, they were blamed for the blood rot." That caught Greaves' attention. The blood rot had been a local name for a short-lived fever that swept through Garrow's Hollow in December of 1852. 6 deaths, all bled from the nose and gums. No known cause, no recurrence since. The doctor, not Caldwell, the one before, said it were miasma. But then a child disappeared. Young Merritt Fenn, found days later curled in the roots of a hawthorn, mouth open, eyes wide, not a drop of blood in him, pale as salt. And that's when they went for the Rhythorns. Who did? Greaves asked. The men, the miners, quietly, at night, with axes and oil. They burned the house. No one spoke of it after. But I remember the smell. It weren't wood they burned. Her voice broke then, and she asked for the conversation to end. Constable Greaves, unsettled but unconvinced, made his way to the old Civic Hall, a building barely standing with worm-eaten beams and dust-fogged windows. He found a record, one only partially legible, dated January 2nd, 1853. By order of the parish council, it is agreed that the former holding of the Rhythorn family, lying eastward past Ash Crag, be declared condemned and no longer suitable for agricultural or residential claim. There was no mention of the fire, no mention of blood, only the removal of a name and the sealing of land. But Greaves noted something else. Tucked inside the ledger, pressed between 2 pages, was a folded scrap of linen, stained dark brown. Sewn into its edge, in red thread, was a series of strange characters. Not Latin, not Greek. He took it to Reverend Finch. The vicar turned it in his hands and frowned. "Not scripture. Not even apocrypha," he muttered. "But this symbol," he tapped one line gently, "is close to the sigil used by the Order of Saint Eligius. They were known for treating plague victims in the 14th century, used to write blessings backwards to confuse death." "Would a family in 1869 know of that?" Greaves asked. "Only if they kept old books or older traditions." By week's end, the atmosphere in the village had changed again. Not more afraid, but quieter. As if the fear had settled into the walls. At the Red Mare Tavern, talk had grown cautious. John Nettles, the farrier, said he'd seen a figure watching the village from the tree line 2 nights running. Tall, black coat, didn't move even when I looked back with the lantern. Others claimed chickens had stopped laying, that the dogs howled at dusk and whimpered through the night. One man, Thomas Reed, swore he heard breathing beneath the floorboards of his cellar. But all of this was anecdote, whispers, half-truths, and fevered memory, except for the letter. It arrived in the chapel post-box on the morning of November 11th, unmarked, folded once, handwritten in slanted, looping script. No return address, no date. Only this: "You found the first. You will not find the second. She is beneath the Rethorn fields, and her blood has already served. Stop looking, or the harvest will come early." Reverend Finch locked it in his desk. He did not report it to the Iansi Ufowa. Regional magistrate. Constable Greaves requested leave the next day. And beneath the western hill, in the forgotten clearing past Ash Crag, something stirred. The Rethorn family had not been seen in Garrow's Hollow in over 17 years, and yet their presence lingered, not in conversation, but in avoidance. There were no portraits, no grave markers, no written records that spoke of births or deaths, and yet every villager over a certain age knew the name. Their land lay a half-mile east of Ash Crag, beyond the thick gorse line where the footpath ended and bramble overtook the trail. Few had ventured there since the winter of 1852. The trees were denser in that part of the hollow, taller, older, gnarled in ways that seemed deliberate. Some swore the trunks bore markings, like eyes or mouths. Others said the forest never lost its colour, even in frost. Before the fire, the Rethorns lived in a timber longhouse with a slate roof and iron crossbar locks, unusual craftsmanship for the area. It stood at the foot of a hill with no name, near a stream that ran red after rain. The house was built with no foundation, only packed earth, and was said to have no chimney. Light, when it escaped from within, was described as flickering, not from flame, but as if from deep, shifting coals. They were not a large family, by record, just 4 members: Silas Rethorn, patriarch, born 1801, Mercy Rethorn, female relation, exact connection unclear, possibly his sister or wife. Elias and Bram, twin sons, born 1828. The parish registry contains only one direct reference to the family. Dated October 14th, 1849, it reads, "Silas Rethorn came seeking baptismal exemption, claimed the blood was already blessed, request denied, there is no record of the children attending school, of crops sold or animals registered, nor any taxes paid after 1850. They were never arrested, nor formally accused of wrongdoing. But neither were they trusted. Their currency was barter. Dried herbs, animal skins, tinctures, and a peculiar red ink that stained deeply and smelled faintly of clove and rust. Villagers recalled that Mercy Rethorn was never seen without gloves, even in the height of summer, that the sons rarely spoke, that Silas walked with a cane made not of wood, but twisted iron marked with rings, and that once, in the winter of 1846, he was seen kneeling in the centre of the chapel. Alone, after hours, facing the altar backwards, his mouth moving in silent prayer. When the fever came in 1852, suspicion turned swiftly toward them. Children fell ill. Nosebleeds began without trauma. Gums thinned, skin paled. It lasted 4 weeks, took 6 lives, and then ended abruptly. As if whatever force fed it had sated its appetite. No charges were brought, no inquiries made. But the Rethorn house was set alight one night in December. Several men were said to have gone up into the forest with oil, hammers, and rope. None would ever confess, and no trial followed. The ruins were left to rot. The forest reclaimed the clearing in weeks. By spring, nothing but scorched earth and ash-flecked stones remained. Or so it was believed. In the second week of November 1869, the youngest archivist at the Bishop's Hall in Lower Malling, a Miss Prudence Halley, uncovered a parcel misfiled behind parish records from 1830. It contained a worn leather-bound journal tied with hemp twine and marked with a symbol, a blood-red ring broken at the top and stitched at the base. Inside was a record, not of sermons nor finances, but of blood. June 9th, 1851. Merritt Fenn, aged 7, bled from the left wrist, took 3 vials before fainting. Result: vision. The white door opens when the heart slows, must keep subject awake next time. August 4th, 1851. Mercy warns against using children, but Silas insists the bond is strongest before memory sets. Disagreement at supper. He says she's forgotten her purpose. She did not argue after that. October 12th, 1852. Harvest soon. The vein map grows. Bram has drawn it in salt behind the longhouse. It whispers at dusk. Elias heard his name today. He wept, but Silas said that was the cost of hearing. The ink had faded in places, but the entries were real. There were 13 pages in total. No surnames were mentioned beyond Fenn. No locations beyond the hollow, the hearth, and the stream mouth. But one detail stood out. A sketch, drawn in iron gall ink, of a circular pattern. Concentric rings with marks at equidistant points. It resembled both a ritual circle and a crude map. When Miss Halley sent the pages to Garrow's Hollow via the regional courier, she included a note. These pages were misfiled under ceremonial liturgies, 1790s, but the date and handwriting suggest something else entirely. The name Bram appears several times, alongside a Silas and Mercy. Do these names mean anything in your records? The Reverend never replied. Back in Garrow's Hollow, others had begun to notice strange occurrences. A shepherd named Orson Blake, whose flock grazed the southern ridge, found one of his ewes dead, not savaged, not bloated, but collapsed. Its eyes were missing. No blood remained, not even in the soil beneath it. 2 days later, the river that wound near the old Rethorn land turned dark red during an evening rain. Some said it was silt, others claimed it smelled sweet, like spoiled wine or iron and berries. On November 16th, a child, Elsie Reed, aged 9, was caught digging near Ash Crag, dirt smeared up to her elbows. When her mother demanded an explanation, Elsie said she had been told to look for the jar. "What jar?" her mother asked. "The one that whispers." She was not punished. No one had seen the Rethorns, and yet the village began to act as though they had returned. The tavern locked its doors after dusk. Children were no longer allowed near the edge of the forest. And on the chapel door, someone nailed a dried sprig of yew and 3 horse teeth tied with twine, a warding sign not seen since the plague years. Reverend Finch removed it, but he kept the teeth, and that night he dreamt of a circle drawn in salt and a woman with no gloves reaching into his chest, not to harm, but to weigh. The morning of November 21st, 1869, began in silence. No carts creaked over the cobbles, no chickens stirred in their pens. Even the wind, so often threading the valley from the north, seemed held in abeyance. The village of Garrow's Hollow woke slow and uncertain. Not with fear exactly, but with the sense that something had already happened, that they had missed it. It was the vicar's housekeeper, Mrs. Adele March, who first noticed the change inside St. Jude's Chapel. She'd arrived early, as she did every Sunday, to light the lanterns and dust the pews, but upon opening the heavy oak doors, she froze. All 43 hymnals were scattered across the floor in a circle. They lay open, precisely aligned, pages fluttering faintly in the unmoving air. A fine ash dusted their edges. Not thick enough to be soot, but grey and fragrant, like burned lavender or hair. At the centre of the ring sat the chapel's collection bowl. It was empty, but inside it, coiled like a sleeping creature, was a single iron chain. One end was freshly broken. The other ended in a ring of blackened flesh. Reverend Finch, when summoned, refused to call it desecration. An intrusion, perhaps, he told Constable Greaves, who had returned from his brief leave. But it feels more like a message. The chain was taken into the vestry, and the hymnals replaced, though a few pages were now unreadable. Ink bled through with a reddish hue, as if the paper had wept from within. That was not the day's only incident. By noon, reports began to trickle in from the far fields. Shepherd Orson Blake, who had previously found the drained yew, now brought word of a collapsed section of hill behind Ash Crag. "The earth gave," he said, "like breath going out." Greaves and Finch accompanied him on foot. The path was narrow and wet, the moss slick underfoot. It took them an hour to reach the edge of the rise. What they found was not a natural landslide. A depression nearly 20 feet across had formed in the soil, its edge unnaturally circular. At the centre, a square of stone, perhaps 4 feet by 4, jutted out from the muck, etched with unfamiliar markings, not weathered, not mossed, fresh. As they drew closer, they saw something else. 4 small holes, one at each corner, threaded with the remains of rusted iron pins. At the centre of the stone, carved in shallow relief, was a symbol none of them recognized. A ring, broken at the top, stitched at the base. Greaves leaned down, brushed away a handful of damp soil, and found what looked like a partial inscription. "The price is in blood, not coin." The vein remembers. There was no date, no names. They returned to the village with a charcoal rubbing and silence between them. That evening, as clouds gathered low over the hollow, something happened in the west quarter of the village. The twins, George and Matthew Alcott, aged 11, were playing near the old well behind the granary. According to their mother, they had been arguing, then laughing, then quiet. Too quiet. When she stepped outside to call them in for supper, she found both boys standing motionless at the edge of the well, their backs turned to her, arms limp at their sides, Neither responded to their names. Only when she touched George's shoulder did he blink, slowly, and whisper, "It's her turn now." They remembered nothing after that. Both boys were examined by Dr. Caldwell. He found no injury, no sign of illness or substance, but he noted their pupils were slow to react to light. Both had elevated heart rates, and both, for reasons unknown, had scratches on the insides of their mouths, as if they'd bitten down to stop themselves from speaking. The next morning, the inside of the well was found painted with a crude symbol in mud, a ring, broken at the top, stitched at the base. On November 24th, a letter arrived by private courier at the Bishop's Hall in Lower Malling. It had no sender, only a stamp from Garrow's Hollow, and a single sentence written on heavy parchment, "You must stop the burial." The heart isn't empty. The courier, an older man named Jeb Cartwright, claimed he'd received the envelope directly from a child at the edge of the village. A girl, 9 or 10, pale hair, no coat, just standing there in the cold with bare feet and a smile. Said nothing, just handed it to me. There was no child reported missing in the area. The letter was preserved and stored in the Ecclesiastical Archive under Anon Warnings, Rural. But no investigation followed. On the night of November 25th, the final unexplainable event occurred, one that would never be mentioned in local histories. Reverend Finch, unable to sleep, ventured into the chapel just before midnight. He later testified, in a written confession found among his belongings decades later, that he felt summoned. The oil lamps flickered low, barely more than embers, but the air was dense with warmth, as if a fire had been burning for hours. In the center aisle stood a figure, tall, female, hair loose, hands bare. She did not turn, did not move, but the Reverend wrote, "I knew her, not in name, nor memory, but in marrow. My bones knew her. My blood slowed. She was Mercy Rethorn, not as she was, but as she had always been, not aged, not faded. Constant he collapsed then, and when he awoke, the chapel was empty, except for one thing. At the pulpit sat an object wrapped in linen, a jar sealed with black wax and bound in iron wire. Inside was not liquid, but ash, and nestled within that ash, an object like a curled leaf, dark red and veined. A heart. It weighed precisely 3 ounces. It was never warm, but never cold. It is still held in the Bishop's Restricted Archive, under code V Mercy 03. No biological match has ever been confirmed. After that night, no further incidents occurred. Not for a time. But on the final page of Reverend Finch's journal, dated November 30th, 1869, one sentence was written in a different hand, jagged, slanted, and strangely familiar. The first was found, the second taken, but the third will awaken on the last frost. The page was smudged with ash, and the ink, when tested over a century later, was found to contain trace amounts of human blood. By the 1st of December, Garrow's Hollow had shifted. It was subtle at first, a change in routines, in glances, in the weight of the air. Men no longer travelled the footpaths alone. Lamps were kept burning through the night. And in the chapel, Reverend Finch ceased his morning readings, opting instead to sit silently behind the pulpit, his eyes fixed on the far end of the nave. The discovery of the heart in the sealed jar had been shared with no one beyond Dr. Caldwell and Constable Greaves. The vicar had insisted. "The village must not become prey to its own stories," he wrote. "To name the thing is to give it root." But stories did not need names to spread. word of the circular stone behind Ash Crag, the one with the etched ring and cryptic inscription, had passed from house to house. Some villagers walked up to view it for themselves. Others began placing warding charms on their doors, burnt rosemary, salt crosses, crow feathers nailed above lintels. Superstition that had not been seen since the turn of the century now returned with quiet urgency. And then something broke. On the night of December 2nd, in a cottage on the western edge of the village, a mother drowned her infant. Her name was Agnes Porter, a seamstress who had lived quietly for years with her husband and newborn daughter, Clara. There had been no indication of distress, no financial hardship, no visible strain. At precisely 2:13 a.m., neighbors were awoken by a series of sharp knocks, not screams, not weeping, just rhythmic pounding, like someone striking wood with the heel of a hand. When they reached the Porter home, they found the front door open. Agnes was seated at the kitchen table, her hair wet, her gown soaked through to the waist. She held nothing. Her eyes were vacant. The infant was found in the copper basin by the hearth. There was no attempt to flee, no denial. Agnes simply whispered again and again. The blood asked. Dr. Caldwell, summoned within the hour, recorded no signs of intoxication, no known history of madness, but he noted something else. Carved into the wooden cradle, with a sewing awl, crudely and with force, was a ring, broken at the top, stitched at the base. Constable Greaves did not question her. There was nothing to ask. She was taken into custody at the small holding cell in Lower Malling. 2 days later, she bit out her own tongue and bled to death before sunrise. Her cell was found marked with the same symbol, drawn in her own blood across the stone floor, perfectly circular. The act had no motive, no precedent, but it made something clear. This was no longer folklore. The next day, Reverend Finch convened a closed meeting with the only 3 people he trusted: Dr. Caldwell, Constable Greaves, and Miss Honora Vale, the village's schoolmistress and historian. Honora had long been considered the keeper of forgotten things. She maintained the town's unofficial records: death logs, lost census entries, abandoned parish minutes, all carefully bound in waxed cloth and shelved in her study behind the schoolhouse. At the meeting, she brought one such record, dated February 2nd, 1804. It was a baptismal denial written in the hand of the then rector, Father Eldrick Rowe. Silas Rethorn presented his sons for anointing. Declined communion, objected to confession, claimed they were already bound to older blood, removed them before the rite. No sacraments given, but Honora also brought something else, a map. Drawn in 1811 by a travelling surveyor, it detailed the region before the modern village had taken shape. There, on the hill east of Ash Crag, was a structure labelled simply W.R. Holding, leased but unclaimed. She pointed to a series of dots drawn around it in a wide ring. 11 in total. These, she said, are documented cairns, burial mounds, older than the settlement, possibly Iron Age. We've always thought them Druidic, but look. She slid a tracing paper overlay across the map, showing the modern topography. 5 of the mounds were still accessible. 6 had vanished beneath roads or homes, the one nearest to the collapsed earth behind Ash Crag, still untouched. Someone, she said, was building something around that hill for centuries. Not randomly, deliberately. And if you look here, she pointed to the center of the ring. The stream bends like a vein. The heart lies there. By December 4th, the atmosphere in the village had frayed. Children spoke less. Animals grew lean. The smith's tools rusted overnight. Bread failed to rise. Parishioners refused to take communion. And in the western fields, a scarecrow was found, with its arms torn off and its chest slit open, stuffed with lamb's wool and river stones. Someone, or something, had begun performing rituals. That same evening, Reverend Finch performed a quiet blessing at the Wreathorn ruins. No crowd, no incense, only salt, oil, and Latin. But as he scattered the salt at the clearing's edge, he stepped back sharply. Beneath his foot, half buried, was a smooth wooden box sealed with pitch. Inside, a wax doll. It was faceless, featureless, except for a thread of pale hair tied around its neck. The thread was human, and wrapped around the doll's torso, in a tight spiral, was a message, inked in cramped script. The third does not sleep. The heart is not yours to bless. The doll was burned that night, but its smoke smelled not of wax, but of vinegar and burnt feathers. As the second week of December began, fear had changed form. It was no longer terror of something distant, but dread of something intimate, something already inside the village. Perhaps always had been. Constable Greaves submitted a formal report to the county authority in Northwell, requesting spiritual intervention or investigative aid. He received no reply. Dr. Caldwell attempted to take leave to visit his sister in Wells. His horse died in the stable before morning. No injury, no illness. Its eyes were missing. And Miss Honora Vale, after presenting her findings to the bishop's clerk, was found 3 nights later sitting at her desk, fully dressed, unmoving, alive, but mute, on the wall behind her, written in charcoal. She heard it. Now she must hold it. She has not spoken since. The final act of that week came not from death, but from life. On December 9th, Elsie Reed, the same child who'd once dug for the whispering jar, disappeared from her bed. Her window was closed, her shoes untouched, but her pillow was wet with blood, not pooled, streaked, as if brushed by hair or cloth soaked and laid down in silence. She was never seen again. But on her bedroom wall, drawn in chalk above her headboard, was a ring, broken at the top, stitched at the base. The day after Elsie Reed vanished, snow fell for the first time. It was not heavy, nor did it settle for long. But it was enough to dull the color of the fields, to hush the crunch of boots on soil, to coat the village roofs in a thin skin of white. Garrow's Hollow, already hollow by name, now looked the part. No one searched for the girl, not openly, not with dogs or posters or cries of her name through the lanes. There was a silence around her absence, not neglect, but paralysis. It was as if the village had already accepted that she was not gone in any ordinary sense, that what had taken her could not be chased. But someone did search, quietly. Miss Honora Vale, who had not spoken since the phrase was found behind her, began to write. On December the 12th, Reverend Finch received a bundle of notes delivered by her niece, a stack of parchment pages tied in red twine. The pages were catalogued, numbered, and meticulously annotated in her hand. Though her voice had failed her, her mind had not. The packet was titled Observations on Blood Traditions in the Hollow, 1789 to 1852. It began not with the Wreathorns, but with something older, a series of ritual events referenced in the journals of Father Linley Darrow, vicar of Garrow's Hollow, from 1794 to 1806. His entries had been dismissed for years as eccentric. He'd claimed visions, shadows at noon, bells that rang on their own. But one entry stood out. August 8th, 1801. A man came down from the woods, not drunk, not mad, bleedin' from the soles of his feet. Said he'd crossed the red ring and seen the mother of the third vein. Said she whispered in the stones, gave him a name in exchange for his blood. The man died before dawn. No family claimed him. He had no teeth. Father Darrow was removed from his post 2 years later. Committed, then lost to the records. But the entry matched something else. Miss Vale had found an old boundary map from 1797, hand-drawn and water-damaged. In the bottom corner, marked faintly in ink nearly faded to invisibility, was a symbol. The ring again. This time not broken, whole, but stitched twice, not once. Below it, in Latin, sanguine ligatur, tertius dormient, bound in blood, the third sleeps. There were more. Buried in the Northwell Diocesan Archive was a weathered probate ledger, preserved only due to a clerical error. It had been misfiled under mining rights. The document, dated 1833, detailed the inheritance of a parcel of woodland near Ash Crag. The recipient, Silas Rethorn, then aged 32. The parcel was labelled untillable. Its description read, south-facing hillock, contains stone foundation of previous structure, origin unknown, proximity to burial cairns noted, inheritance processed without land tithe, due to unworkable soil. Attached was a short handwritten note from the clerk. He accepted the land without signature, gave a drop of blood instead, pressed his thumb to the ledger's corner. The stain remains Miss Vale had included a sketch of that page. The thumbprint was still faintly visible, and it was not human in shape. It was too thin, too long, more like a pressed reed than a finger. The bundle also contained transcriptions from 3 separate interviews conducted with village elders in the early 1850s, part of a now-lost folk history project. The original documents had burned in the fire of '64, but Miss Vale had copied portions into her own notebooks from an interview with Ephraim Lyle, carpenter, aged 73. Silas Rethorn paid in tincture. Red stuff, stained my wife's apron near permanent. Said it was from berries grown in the hollow. But there's no berries that red, nor that thick from Mary Kettle, laundress, aged 61. Mercy Rethorn once brought a cloth to be boiled, said it had touched the sealed place, told me not to breathe near it. The water turned black, not grey, not brown, black like ink, and it smelled like burnt teeth, and from Magistrate Halberd, retired, aged 84. No record of them in tax rolls after 49, but they never left, just shifted, like they lived between here and somewhere else. Not ghosts, not people, just something older pretending. The most chilling discovery came last. Enclosed in the bundle was a letter, sealed in wax and unopened. A note clipped to it read, "Found in the baseboard compartment of the schoolhouse." Undated, unsigned. But the handwriting matches that of Bram. Rethorn Reverend Finch broke the seal himself. The letter was short, written in an uneven hand, slanted sharply to the right. The ink brown-red. The grammar strange. "To whom the hollow falls, know this. The third vein is not like the others. The first needed death. The second needed silence. But the third needs knowing. When it wakes, it will not ask, it will answer. All those who hear it are already in the circle. Do not look, do not bury, do not bless. What you call horror is only hunger. No date, No location, no name. Just the ring, drawn again at the bottom, this time stitched 3 times, with a dot in its center. That same day, Reverend Finch collapsed. He had been reading the final pages of Miss Vale's bundle when he fell backward in the vestry. His head struck the floor. Dr. Caldwell found no trauma, no sign of stroke. His pulse was steady, but he would not wake. He lay there for 9 hours, unmoving, breathing slow, eyes flickering beneath closed lids. When he awoke, just before midnight, he spoke only once. "It is not a curse, it is a memory." And then he wept. From that night forward, the snow did not melt. Each morning it returned, a thin white veil over Garrow's Hollow, even when the sky was clear. The days shortened unnaturally fast, and on December 14th, the sun did not rise fully above the horizon. Shadows stretched long. The birds flew west, and beneath the collapsed hill near Ash Crag, something began to thaw. It was the night of December 16th, 1869, when the bells rang again. Not the chapel bells. Those had not been rung since Agnes Porter's child was buried in silence. But a deeper sound, muffled, distant, like iron dragged across stone. It came not from the village, but from beneath it. 3 times it sounded, each tone low, resonant, bone-deep. No one moved, no doors opened, but every window candle was extinguished. Whether by wind or by breath, none could say. At the schoolhouse, Miss Vale, mute since the beginning of the month, was found standing barefoot in the snow, her dress soaked to the waist, staring northeast toward Ash Crag. Her niece tried to pull her inside, but Honora simply pointed. "She's opening it," she wrote on a scrap of paper. "Mercy is opening the 3rd. The next morning, Constable Greaves made a decision. He assembled a party of 4, himself, Dr. Caldwell, John Nettles, the farrier, and Josiah Byrne, a mason's apprentice, to descend into the depression behind Ash Crag and examine the circular stone more closely. By midday they had reached the site. What they found was not as they'd left it. The stone slab, once only partially unearthed, was now fully revealed. The soil around it had collapsed cleanly, as if removed by careful, unseen hands. It was not one stone, but a trapdoor. 2 halves joined by iron hinges, now rusted to orange-black, and at its center, embedded deep in the grain, was a handle made of twisted bone. No one touched it at first. Dr. Caldwell produced a vial of camphor oil and dabbed it beneath his nose. "The smell," he whispered. "It's not rot. It's breath. Something exhaled here." Recently the group debated, prayed, then opened it. Beneath the trapdoor lay a staircase of stone, chiseled into the earth, descending in a perfect spiral. The walls were dry, unmossed, unnaturally smooth. No torch soot, no insect life. They descended in silence for nearly 30 feet. At the bottom, a chamber, no larger than a church apse, shaped like a circle within a square. The floor was packed earth, the walls reinforced with wooden beams, darkened by time, but still strong. Along the edges were 6 alcoves. In 5 of them rested jars, identical in size and shape to the one found earlier, sealed with black wax, bound in iron wire. Each jar contained ash, and in that ash, something small. A bone, a curled strip of leather, a molar. But the 6th alcove was empty. In the center of the chamber lay a raised platform, stone again, this time engraved with the ring symbol, stitched 3 times. Above it, hanging from iron chains bolted to the beams, dangled a heart. It was not preserved, not dried. It pulsed, faintly, slowly, as if it had been waiting. The men stood motionless. Dr. Caldwell stepped forward first and noted that the heart was not suspended by hook or spike. It simply floated within the loop of chains, held aloft by unseen tension. Its veins were long, thin, and frayed, ending in roots that had burrowed into the stone. He recorded his findings in a pocket journal. "This is no artifact. This is no relic. This is a biological truth we do not understand. I do not think it lives. I think it remembers no one spoke. No one touched it. They turned back. What happened next was never fully explained." 2 days later, John Nettles was found in the riverbed, curled in the reeds, face skyward, his chest opened not by knife, but by rupture. There was no blood at the scene. His heart was gone. Josiah Byrne hanged himself from the beams of the old granary. When cut down, a symbol was found carved into his back. Not the ring, but an open eye with 3 vertical lines beneath it. As if tears or veins, Dr. Caldwell disappeared entirely. He left his clinic undisturbed, his journal open on the table with one last entry. "I hear it now. In the hollow of the throat, in the beating of teeth. It wants to be remembered through us. Not as a god, as a wound, and Constable Greaves, he was last seen walking toward Ash Crag, wearing his full uniform and carrying no lantern. His badge was found nailed to the chapel door the following morning. No one claimed it. By the winter solstice, Reverend Finch sealed the church. He affixed to the doors a parchment bearing an unfamiliar prayer. To the third that stirs, we give no name. To the blood that binds, we give no vessel. To the heart that remembers, we give no altar. Let the silence be our sacrament, Miss." Vale, still mute, continued to write. Her final entry before leaving the village was found tucked inside a volume of forgotten sermons. The jars are not coffins, they are memories. And someone, Mercy perhaps, was keeping them apart. The first vein required death, the second required silence. But the third needs telling. That's why it's waking now. We've spoken too much, or not enough. She left the hollow on foot and was never seen again. In early January, a travelling merchant passed through Garrow's Hollow and found it unchanged. Fires burned in hearths, smoke curled from chimneys, but the village was silent, too silent. He reported no dogs, no footsteps, no children. He knocked on 3 doors, no answers. At the chapel, he found the doors unlocked. Inside, everything was in order, except the pulpit was gone. In its place, a ring of salt. At the center, a 6th jar, unlabeled, fresh, still warm. He left immediately. In 1974, a graduate student researching folk burial customs in Somerset rediscovered the Wreathorn name in a corrupted local ledger. Her inquiry reached the archives of Northwell, where fragments of the Finch, Vale, and Caldwell records were still preserved under restricted access. She compiled what she could, including the original Bram Wreathorn letter, the sketches of the ring, the map overlay, and the sealed heart record, V Mercy 03, into a private research folder. The folder was never published. 3 months later, her advisor found her apartment abandoned. No sign of struggle. Only a single sentence written on her mirror in red wax. The vein remembers. By the end of January 1870, Garrow's Hollow no longer appeared on regional maps. The omission was not abrupt. It began with ink fading on older charts, surveyors avoiding the northeastern routes, and eventually a clerk in Northwell removing the village from the active civil parish list due to lack of census return. No formal declaration, just absence. But the place still existed, a tangle of lanes, empty cottages, and a chapel with doors nailed shut, chimneys that puffed smoke but released no scent, windows that reflected only sky, and a silence so absolute that even the crows would not land. The hollow had emptied itself, or had been emptied. The last verifiable document to emerge from the village was a letter. It was dated February 1st, 1870, postmarked from Garrow's Hollow, and addressed to a Reverend Ellis of St. Bartholomew's in Northwell. The handwriting matched that of Reverend Amos Finch, though the ink was faint, and the lines wavered, as if written by trembling hands. Brother Ellis, I write not to report, but to resign. Not from the church, but from the presumption of its protection. The sacraments have no hold here. The ground does not listen. The rites do not echo. What we have witnessed was not evil, not in the way Scripture names it. But memory older than law, blood older than covenant. There were 3 veins, one for death, one for silence, one for knowing. I now understand. The 3rd vein was always meant to be the village itself. The letter ends there. No signature. The envelope arrived empty. In the decades that followed, Garrow's Hollow became the subject of quiet academic curiosity, not for its history, but for its lack of one. No census returns after 1869. No death certificates, no birth records, property deeds unclaimed, land left untaxed. By 1912, the entire area had been classified by the Northwell Council as non-essential woodland buffer. A wildlife conservation project was proposed, but never completed. Surveyors claimed the terrain was unstable. Instruments failed, compasses spun, and on more than one occasion, men reported nosebleeds and pressure behind the eyes after only minutes near Ash Crag. In 1937, the Royal Geographic Society removed the hamlet from all National Survey records. The last attempt to re-establish contact came in 1944 during wartime rationing. A delivery lorry, mistakenly routed through the hollow, was found abandoned 2 days later on the B121 lane near Bramble Row. The engine was cold, the headlamps smashed. No driver, no cargo. But in the dust on the back panel, someone had drawn a symbol. A ring, broken at the top, stitched at the base. Today, Garrow's Hollow is rarely spoken of. Its land is privately held, though the name does not appear in tax ledgers. The chapel still stands, though its beams have warped and ivy coils tight around its stone frame, like muscle around bone. The Reethorn clearing is now a hollow within a hollow, swallowed by overgrowth and shadow. But those who visit, mostly wanderers, the curious, or the lost, sometimes report finding something. Not people, not ruins, but sound, low, rhythmic, and wet, like a heartbeat against stone. Some hear it in the trees, others in the soil beneath their boots. One man, a geologist from Exeter, claimed to hear it from inside his chest. He recorded the noise once on a wax cylinder. When replayed, it was not a beat, but a word, spoken slowly, breathless. Remember, the jar labeled V Mercy 03 still exists. It is currently sealed in a temperature-controlled drawer within the restricted holdings of the Northwell Diocesan Archive, visible only by special appointment. It is wrapped in double linen and bound with iron wire, precisely 19 turns. Inside, the heart has not decayed. Its color remains, a deep purplish red. Veins still visible. A single stitch of pale hair tied around the base. It weighs exactly 3 ounces, as it did in 1869. No scientific explanation has ever been given. nor has one been offered for the other 5 jars, now lost, scattered, or hidden, though one is rumoured to have been found in an antique shop in Wales, sealed inside a carved box labelled only Mercy's memory. It was purchased by a collector. The shopkeeper died 1 week later. In the schoolhouse, which still stands, though its windows are dusted over and its door won't open fully, a final chalk message remains faintly visible on the blackboard, as if written by a child's hand. We are the third. We live inside the vein. No one claims to know what it means, but in every mirror left hanging in Garrow's Hollow, the same flaw has been noted. A thin, reddish crack near the top, shaped like a ring. And in winter, if the snow comes early, you might still hear the chapel bell, ringing not from the steeple, but from below. Thank you for listening to this journey into history's darkest corners. If you believe stories like this reveal more than just forgotten events, if you suspect some truths don't fade, they only wait, then subscribe for more tales buried beneath time. And tell us, do you think the heart still remembers? Or was Garrow's Hollow simply the third vein opening?